So I provide forest management plans for small forest landowners. We do wildlife management as a part of that. So if you're curious about how to build wildlife habitat on your property, we can talk about that. And then also wildfire risk assessments, which we're going to talk about today. And then our farm assistance program focuses on farm planning, conservation planning for agricultural activities, a program called PREP, which is conservation riparian easement. So if you have a stream through your property, that would focus on building a buffer around that stream area to improve water quality. And then promoting best management or better management practices on farm and just improving your general activities around there. And then we also have a lot of great resources on our website about sustainable landscaping. So if you're interested in reading more about that, we have several flyers on the website. Okay, so in terms of wildfire preparedness, so Mason Conservation District partners with the Department of Natural Resources Wildfire Ready Neighbors program and the Community Wildfire Resilience program, along with our fire districts in the area. This last year, we worked specifically with Central Mason and North Mason fire districts to start this program with DNR, and we've been building basically awareness and providing resources for people all throughout the county to help mitigate wildfire on their properties, big or small. So this last year was the first year that this Wildfire Ready Neighbors program was launched in Western Washington. So it was pretty exciting to see that happening and to have more resources focused on this side of the state to help with mitigating wildfire, as we're seeing more and more of that in recent years. So as part of that program, we work with DNR and the fire districts to provide that technical assistance so we can come out to your property and talk about what you specifically can focus on in terms of mitigation on your property, and get more resources that are personalized to you for that work. I think my text changed when they copied over, so some of these are a little squished together now. So in general, wildfires in Western Washington, we are seeing an increase, even though, we do get, a lot of rain, a lot of moisture, but we're seeing more dry days during the summer, and we're seeing longer summer periods, as I'm sure you've all noticed in your own properties. We're getting a lot more dry spells, especially in the fall of 2022. That was one of the driest falls in recent history in Western Washington. And so now we're seeing, an increase of general fires in Western Washington to around 30 and 40% of the fires in the state. So when we're thinking about fire, we're thinking about a couple of different factors that would lead to a fire starting. We're seeing increased air temperatures, reduced summer rain, and earlier snow melt to reduce water on the landscape in general. And that in turn is drying out our fuels and our forest systems and increasing that likelihood of an ignition happening when the wind and temperature are in the right place. So when we're thinking about what can we do to mitigate fire on the landscape, we're looking at reducing the intensity of the fire, so that firefighters can suppress those fires easier, increasing the odds of survival of trees and vegetation and ourselves and our homes on the landscape, and then reducing the extent of post-fire restoration that's needed. We're never going to be able to completely eliminate fire from our ecosystems, and fire provides a lot of great benefits. So we focus on what we can do to make fire a better tool for us and something that we can live with and work with. So in terms of thinking about what you can do in your community, we have what's called the Wildland Urban Interface, which is where you have the development coming into more rural areas and more forested areas with a lot more vegetation. And so in that area is where we see the most risk, because you're more intermixed. A lot of times it's harder to get to. You have more, a longer wait for emergency response. So looking at these specific communities in the WUI area is where we're thinking most about mitigating the fire risk. So just because there is a fire doesn't mean that a community necessarily will burn either. So what we're looking at specifically in terms of reducing risk is reducing areas that could be affected by ember showers. The research has shown that embers that are coming ahead of fires are actually at the highest risk of igniting a home. So when we're thinking about mitigation, we're looking at ways that we can prevent those embers from finding a fuel source on the property. So here's a great example of, intensity and survival. So, the picture on the left was a high intensity fire, but there's an area of refugia where, the home is still standing. There's still trees around that standing, and that's due to the activities that you can do around your home. Whereas we see on the right, that was probably a low intensity ground fire, but the home still burned due to other factors that are mostly just around the home. So that's a great picture of, how these different activities we're going to talk about can really make an impact. So like I mentioned before, the biggest threat to your home during a fire is the ember showers that fly ahead of the fire. And these embers can be up to a mile in front of the fire. And so you wanna make sure like you're thinking about that. You can be affected by embers even when you're pretty far away. So we want to reduce the conditions that would cause any kind of an ignition near your home. The saying is, if a home doesn't ignite, it doesn't burn. So we've got to prevent that initial ignition. And you can see this picture here is a ember storm in Wenatchee. And it's pretty cool. During the research that they do for wildfire, they basically have a machine that simulates this kind of a firestorm, and they throw embers at, a fake house with different conditions and can like watch how it reacts. So it's pretty cool. Okay, so when we are talking about reducing risk around the home, we think about 3 different areas. We have the immediate zone, which is from your house and what's on your house to 5 feet out. The intermediate zone, which is 5 to 30 feet out, and then the extended zone, which is 30 to 100 feet. So thinking about the immediate zone, we're looking at what is actually on your house. What does your roof look like? What does your siding look like? What's your windows? What kind of landscaping do you have within that 5-foot zone? Do you have a deck attached? Do you have a fence attached to your home? All those little factors can change what kind of recommendations we would make. So, the goal in the ideal scenario is to eliminate anything that's combustible within that 5 feet of your home. But realistically, that's not always going to happen. So we look at, what's the best case scenario for your home specifically. So starting with the roof, we got some wood shingles here, obviously not the most fire resistant material. So most people these days have the composite roofing. Yeah, and that's a pretty durable material. It's going to be fairly fire resistant. You'll obviously want to look for, if you're redoing a roof or if you're building a new home, you want to look for that fire resistance rating. Building materials should have some kind of a rating associated with them, and you want to work with whoever you're having to do that repair or build to make sure that meets those standards. But other than the material the roof is made out of, you also want to make sure, you're not seeing buildup of leaf litter and debris on the roof. A lot of times you're not just looking at one whole flat roof surfaces, you're gonna have changes in the roofing structure. You're gonna have a place where siding and roofing come together. So those areas are really important to look at in terms of keeping those clean and minimizing the amount of buildup that you see there. Basically, anywhere you see your leaves collecting on your roof is also where embers would collect in a ember storm. So, if the leaves are there, the embers will flow there. So you want to, remove that material as much as possible. So then moving down the roof, we've got the gutters, the skylights, the chimneys. These are basically all the areas where fuels can accumulate on your roof. Behind chimneys are especially tricky. You won't see it until you get up there. Take a look. Gutters, it's a big thing around here because we do get so much rain in the winter. It is important to clean out your gutters for that purpose, but then also for when it gets dry, you want to reduce the amount of material in there. The interesting thing about gutters is, you might think, oh, I've got a metal gutter, no problem, like the gutter's not going to ignite. But if you have that fuel source, you're right under the edge of your roof. And what we're really looking at is that fire going to ignite in your gutter and then burn underneath your roof where you may not be able to see it. So we want to think about all of those factors when we're looking at regular maintenance. And then moving further down, we have vents and eaves. So, a lot of people have those gable eaves at the top of the home, or you have vents underneath your roof line. With those, that's a specific area where embers can, come in, go into the attic area, burn inside of your home, and you may not have physical access to put out that fire. When we talk about vents and eaves, what we really want to see is screening there. And what the research has shown is that 1/8 inch screening is enough to stop that ember from going through and still being lit. So we want to look at what size screening you have on the home. A lot of times it's typically 1/4 inch, which is a little bit too big, still lets that ember go straight through. So we will look at switching that out to an 1/8 inch screen. So windows, we want to think about how thick the windows are, whether they've been treated to withstand higher heat. I can't think of the name right now, what they're called, but tempered, that's it. Tempered glass, you want to think about, because that's going to be able to withstand more heat directly, but also double pane is going to be able to withstand more heat. You have that added protection of a second layer if the outer window is to break. Additionally, you want to think about the vegetation below your window or in front of your window. If that were to ignite, that would add basically a focused heat point on that window to damage the outside. And that's where it comes into play, thinking about, what's around your window. Is it a vinyl holding your window together? Is it a wood window frame casing? Yes. What that material is, because that could also be damaged if there was a fire directly on the home. For siding, we've got that one of those great pictures here from those tests they do. So they're blowing an ember storm here at the top, straight at a home with wooden siding versus a home with the hardy plank siding. And they've also added, leaves on the bottom and some other material there. So you can see how that, kind of pretty quickly lit up where the other one is not showing any signs. So that's kind of our examples there of those two different types of preparations. So with the siding, you're going to want to look for more fire resilient materials. If you have cedar siding, it's not the end of the world. You can still perform some of these activities in order to reduce that risk, especially when thinking about, what's right next to the home and attached to it. But if you have the opportunity to get, a composite siding or a flame resistant siding, then that should be a priority there. The other thing is, you know, we talked earlier about, you know, what's attached to your home, fencing, decking, that makes a big difference in terms of, you have a ladder straight towards your house that fire can move down. I'll have a picture right here. So we have your deck. If you've got a place where leaves or debris is accumulating on your deck, like we talked about earlier, that's where the embers are gonna go as well. So if you have, you know, that little pile of leaves that sits in the corner all the time, you know, that's what we look at, you know, keep that cleaned out. If you have stuff you leave on your deck, like a patio furniture or a pile of wood, you know, that's something we want to either see, you know, covered up or removed to reduce the amount of fuels on the deck. Additionally, with any deck that's raised, that would be another area where we think about screening it off. If you're, you know, you've only got 6 inches of room, you're not going to be underneath your deck. We think about, you know, screen that off so that you don't have to worry about stuff blowing under there, drying out, and being ready kindling for anything. And then you also would think about, you know, preventing those embers from going underneath your deck and burning through a wooden deck. So that again would be that 1/8 inch screening that we'd recommend for underneath any kind of a deck. For fencing, like we mentioned earlier, that's pretty much a line straight into your home. If you can prevent a fence from being attached to your home, that's the best thing. If not, putting in a section of metal fencing that's attached to your home versus, and then attach the wooden fence, that's another great option to look at. But you know, your fencing can ignite from the materials laying around it, even pretty far out from your home, and then just run all the way down to that area. And then we think about additional structures. A lot of people have, you know, woodshed, garage, pump house, all of those little detached structures you want to think about. You know, we want to make that 5-foot perimeter around those as well, as much as we can, preventing any kind of overhanging limbs, reducing the amount of fuels directly around it, because once you have one thing igniting on your property, you know, that's obviously going to be throwing a lot more embers directly at your home than it would before. So you're, and you also may have, you know, valuables stored in there that you would want to keep whole too. So protecting that area similarly to your home is an important factor. Okay, and then we're moving a little bit further out. So the intermediate zone, we're thinking a lot more about landscaping. You know, you may have a hedgerow, or, you know, you may start to get into, if you have a forested area, those kind of things, we want to keep them lean, clean, and green. That's the phrase to keep in mind. So we want to keep it, all the dead material moved out from underneath any of those bushes. We want to keep them well watered if possible. That's getting a little harder and harder with our dry summers. So the other option is to use more fire resistant plants. So plants that are not going to be resinous or, you know, sticky, tacky. We're looking at something that's going to stay lush and green as much as possible. A good example of one of our native plants is rhododendron. That's a pretty wet plant, stays green most of the year. So you're going to be better off having something like that rather than something like a juniper, which is extremely flammable and resinous. So here's kind of a good little image for the intermediate zone. You know, you want to have stuff spaced out. We're looking at creating patches rather than any kind of a continuous fuel area. So if you can break up your landscaping into more of a clumpy situation with, you know, your green grass in between it, gravel in between it, any kind of non-flammable material or something you can keep well watered. So another thing to consider, we have a lot of good topography out here in Mason County. We've got a lot of nice views, but they're often, you know, on the edge of a hill. So when we think about the topography of the area, fire is gonna burn quicker up a hill because it's basically preheating stuff that's uphill from it. And like this little image shows, you've got that wind also can be pushing the wind can be pushing the fire uphill as well. So you gotta think about, you know, what else is out there that would affect the movement of fire near your home. And then you also want to think about, you know, what other structures or items are around your home. So propane tanks and electrical lines are big ones. You know, a propane tank, you know, don't quote me on this, isn't necessarily going to explode, but it would off gas and provide basically a little torch right there in the area. So we want to, you know, keep the propane tanks away from the home if possible. And, you know, electrical lines, if there's storm damage, wind damage, that can often be an ignition source for fires. So thinking about where those are located at and what you can do to mitigate those circumstances. All right, and then moving even further out, we go to the 30 and 100-foot zone. And within this area, you're basically, we want to think about that clumpy landscaping situation as well. And you know, we're very heavily treed in this area. So thinking about where we can reduce ladder fuels on the trees lines, where we can reduce spread in the crown if there was to be a crown fire, you know, preventing that from traveling tree to tree, creating some kind of interruption. So looking at thinning your trees out, making sure there's not overhanging branches over, you know, your home or your side structures, and then pruning a gap between your understory vegetation and your overstory. And this is also where it's very important to work with your neighbors. A lot of communities, you don't have, or you don't own that 30 to 100 feet. It's on somebody else's property. If you have your home close to your property line, or if you're in a community that's more tightly packed in. So working collaboratively is one of the biggest things you can do. You're also making you're maximizing those benefits that you would get just from doing one home when you're doing it to multiple homes in the area, basically creating a wall of defensible space, and that's going to help reduce the overall community risk. And so with that neighborhood level concept, we're thinking about what types of programs that we can connect you all with to work on that. So we have this pyramid here. And it shows, so the Wildfire Ready Neighbors program that we're working with is kind of that top area where we're thinking on the individual level. So we're first looking at, you know, what can you do and around your home to be a good example, and then maybe you go and talk to your neighbor about it, and you can each as individuals start working on that within your own property. And then the next level would be looking at a program like Firewise USA, which is the community or neighborhood level programming to get kind of everybody on board with these types of activities. And you know, you don't have to all do it perfectly for it to be effective. You know, we just want to start that engagement and get everyone started working on small things, one step at a time. You know, getting some involvement is better than getting no involvement. So we got to work at it a little bit at a time. And then from there, we go to programs like Fire Adapted Communities, which is basically more of a regional scale. You can work with basically local work groups to try and promote these types of efforts across the board throughout the region. So a little bit more about Firewise USA. This is a really great voluntary program for communities to get into. It provides a recognition for your community in terms of, you know, you get a cool little sign to place out front, but you also get access to resources. So every year or every 5 years, you get a assessment done by a wildfire professional for the community. And then with the community, you'd put together a action plan of what you want to work on in those next 5 years. And you also get access to some funding through Firewise USA. They have grant funding available. And you also have the opportunity for funding through programs like the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, which is something that Mason County is working on getting a renewal on. So when you are identified as a Firewise USA community, you can apply for more of these state and national grants. And speaking of grant funding, if you are interested in becoming a Firewise USA community, or your community is just interested in doing work, GNR has a micro grant coming out, that's already out. So if you're interested in that, I can get you connected. But yeah, it's all voluntary work. But it provides a great benefit to the community and a lot of educational opportunities. So some of the takeaways, homes don't burn if they don't ignite. Just keep that in mind. We're focusing on that 5 feet around your home. That is one of the most important areas to look at. And it's the best place to start if you are trying to figure out what to do. So thinking about keeping flammable material away from the 5 feet around your home. That would include bark chips, those highly resinous plants, reducing the height of your plants around your windows, and keeping that leafy debris off your porches and your roof. So we can reach out for more assistance if you're interested. That is here. So you can go to wildfireready.com and you can sign up and get a little plan that they'll email you. And then you also you can request a site visit and you get put on the list. And through the Wildfire Ready neighbors, you will most likely get sent to me. And then we'll work with me and my technician to get you a site visit done. And once you have a site visit, you'll get a little report and we'll identify kind of your personalized priorities for your home to work on. Yeah, so I think if I have time for some questions, I could take a few questions. Yeah.
For decks, I have an older wooden deck, although I have a metal roof. I've got this older wooden deck.
Yeah.
Are there materials that you can coat it with, or is there recommendations, or is there a website where you can find information like that on?
Yes, there is a flyer on the Firewise USA site, and I can send that out with the materials about deck coatings. There are deck coatings available. I'm not as familiar with them because I'm not someone who applies those, but there are some materials we can get out about deck coatings too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So when you were talking about the neighborhood, getting together with your neighborhood, so I live kind of, out in the country a little bit, but the people across the street from us, they're like hoarders, and so there's cars, I think there's like 8 cars, gas cans, there's a lot of flammable material all around their yard and their house.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what to do. I mean, that's our biggest hazard, honestly. I mean, their propane tank is like next to the house.
Yeah, and that's something I, hear a lot. Neighbors can sometimes be challenging to work with. So if you have that situation, we have some brochures and flyers. You can start, if you're on friendly terms, reach out. No, okay.
They're the kind of people that if you come near their house, they get their gun and stand in the door.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, so we're non-regulatory, and this is not a regulatory issue, so we can't make them do anything. But if it's possible to friendly reach out to people, then that's the best way to try and educate.
I'm sure hoarding's a complex issue, so I know it's not that they have stuff out in the yard and there's more going on over there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know what to do. I mean, we made sure the front of our property is all cleared, and We've got an old fence we're taking down.
Okay.
The rock wall, but I don't know what else we can.
Yeah, so, yeah, in cases like that, you know, just working on your own place is sometimes the best place to start, and, you know, hopefully that'll get them curious about what you're doing, and, you know, provide an opportunity for some education.
Yeah.
So we live in the shadow of Pork Lake Fleet Tree Farm,
Okay,
and I would assume that they have plans in place for their property as well for fire stewardship, right?
mhm.
Okay, good.
Yeah, for the most part, you know, there is gonna be plans for, you know, those larger industrial tree farms about fire. But, you know, I'd encourage you to reach out and talk to them if you have concerns. Their priorities are gonna be different than your priorities, of course, so, you know, if you can voice that concern to them and, you know, maybe work together to get some of those things dealt with, you know, if you want to prune some of those trees that are on the edge of the property, things like that, you can talk with them and see if they'd be amenable to that.
Is it your office that comes out to do the Firewise USA evaluation too for a neighborhood, or?
Yeah, so we have done, some of the neighborhood level assessments. So yes, that could be us, but it could also be our DNR, Community Wildfire Resiliency person. Jesse Duval is our brand new person for that. So he'll be starting in a couple weeks, and I can get you his information then, so if you're interested in talking to him as well. But yeah, we can provide those community assessments as well and do community presentations if you want to talk to your HOA specifically about, you know, getting into the Firewise program. Okay,